Hello everyone. In this presentation we're going to talk about understanding spelling, the content of spelling with the English language, so that we can properly plan and carry out interventions. Okay, we're going to start by talking about the relationship between spelling and reading. And if you haven't already read the Moats article called How Spelling Supports Reading, that's assigned for this week. I'm going to have you pause after the next slide and read that before we get into this presentation. So those of you who have taken some of your ESL classes or an SEI class, you know that reading, writing, listening, and speaking are connected. So especially right now through this slideshow, we're going to be thinking about reading and writing, or sounding out words for reading and sounding out words for spelling, and the connection between those two. Now, your content knowledge of the English language, of spelling, of orthography is going to impact your teaching. The more you know about how our system of writing is built, the better you'll be about error handling. You'll have more appropriate expectations for your students, and you'll be able to make quick analysis of student work and know what it is that they need and what their mistakes are telling you. So I want you to think, I know you're just at the beginning of your tutoring project for this class, but I want you to think what the spelling looks like so far in your tutoring. Is it just sort of a quiz at the end of each lesson? Or is it more than that? Louisa Moats is one of my favorite researchers. In fact, I quoted her, I referenced her in my dissertation more than any other researcher. Partially that was because of what she studies, and she studies teachers and teacher knowledge. And that was the content of my research as well. So, and she's also the writer of our book that we use in this course, From Speech to Print. So let's pause now, and you're going to read this article if you haven't yet. The part, I'm going to break it down for you which parts to read and study closely and which parts to skim. So you're going to skim page 12 to the top of 15, and then pages 15 and 16 and 20 and 21, I want you to read thoroughly. And then at the end of the article, again, you can kind of skim the 21 to 42. To check those numbers. Okay, now there's like a little insert within the article, and you can read that as it comes up, or you can read it before or after. But that page 17, 18, I think it is, that's a subsection with grade level content. So if you're wondering what is expected or what is taught at each grade, you know, what's developmentally appropriate, there it is right there. That is also in your Moats book. I'm not sure which chapter it is off the top of my head, but that's what you want to have in your brain. You need to have that developmental continuum in your brain, so when you're assessing someone who's below grade level, you can see what things they can and can't do. Now, of course, it's all relative. If they don't come from a school where phonics, word study, and systematic spelling is taught, then it's no wonder that they don't know these things. But it helps to kind of have that typical continuum in your brain, so that you can better understand the kinds of errors and the ways that your students are struggling. Okay, so pause and go read that article now. These are some of the illustrations and the artwork from that article, and I wanted to put them up on the screen because I don't know if they copied that well in your version. The bigger illustration there on the left has the words remedy, medicine, medicinal, and they all have that root med. So that's something that the more you teach this kind of content, the more you start, hopefully, the more you will become aware of these roots, the more you'll be aware of these roots that we find in words. So when we're thinking about things that do and do not play fair, or where to break up words based on syllable, it helps for you to know these roots, because when you see those little meaningful parts in words, that's going to cue you in terms of spelling. It's also going to cue you in terms of meaning. The other little box has the EIGH, or all the different sounds of A. So we've got way, feign, cradle, maybe. And do you see how they're like written in rainbow colors or bright colors? That's how we want things to stand out to our readers and our spellers. We want them to look at a word, and we want those itty bitty word parts to be highlighted in their brain. Even though everything they read is black and white, we want those little word parts to be alive and be recognizable, not just a meaningful list of symbols that they have to memorize. So if we want it to come alive for them, then we have to think about ourselves. What are we doing as teachers to make these patterns show up for our kids? And there are too many patterns to teach at once. So how can we systematically unroll the patterns of our language, whether it's orthography, seen in that long A picture, or morphology, seen in that the MED picture. This visual is from one of your readings this week. It's from the Center on Instruction's Why Teach Spelling. Spelling for years, for me in my practice, was sort of a back burner thing. I just kind of thought it was like the flip side of reading. I didn't really understand how it could support students as readers. It wasn't just the flip side. It could support students as readers, but also, especially when we talk about morphology, which a lot of spelling is involved with, it has to do with meaning. So I urge you not to put spelling on the back burner in your classrooms or in your intervention work. It should be a front burner thing. So we can kind of see at the top of the slide there, it says linguistic knowledge, and then it has these two chunks, the decoding chunk, which is the reading, and the encoding chunk, which is the spelling. Now, related to spelling, of course, is the skill of segmenting sounds. We also have handwriting, and then the trickiest part is that orthographic representation of the word. So those would be the spelling choices. Why do we use long A here? Why do we use the AI versus the EIGH? Those kinds of choices. So for this slide, I want you to also not only think of which patterns are taught at each grade level, or things like Greek and Latin roots, but also just even where does spelling start? This concept of we put down symbols to represent sounds, which make up words, which we use to convey meaning. So it really starts with the alphabetic principle. Just like a toddler flips through the book and talks to themselves and knows that there's a story in there somewhere, even if they can't read it. Same, a toddler might write some scribbles on a paper and tell you what they've written or what they've drawn. It's that first attempt to represent their meaning in print somehow. So that's where it all develops. It's important that we know this continuum because the students that we work with are struggling students. They're either ESL students or they struggle because of a curriculum casualty in reading, or they struggle because of neurological differences such as dyslexia and dysgraphia. So that's the population we're serving. So we don't just need to be a master at that one particular grade level. We need to know the whole continuum because our students are going to be anywhere along that line, and we have to meet them where they are and purposely, help them move upwards. So take a minute here to pause and just read through this entire slide. Now, you need to know this not only if you are a specialist for ESL or reading, but also if you're a grade level teacher, because in your classroom, of course, you are going to have struggling students. And it doesn't matter what curriculum your school gives you. If they give you any spelling curriculum at all, if they give you an outrageous one, you still need to know all of this so you can make good judgments about the kinds of instruction and the kinds of materials that your kids need. So this is the meat of the presentation here. I want you to be an expert on phonology, orthography, and morphology. This is for reading specialists and ESL people, because no matter who you work with, you need to know how the English language is organized. Now, this isn't just the language system, on paper. This is actually how our brains are organized. So the right side of your brain is where the phonological processor is, the orthographic processor, and the morphological processor. And each of those three zones contributes to reading and spelling. So as you might remember, there isn't one little reading zone in the brain. It's actually this complex coordination of all these parts of the brain working in tandem in, a millisecond to read or spell. So when we think of phonology, the hint here is that it's all about sounds. So phonology is the student's ability to hear and process and manipulate the individual sounds in words. So we can probably all remember phoneme seg. If I said the word back, you would go b-ack. That's phoneme seg. That's one level of phonology, but there's more sophisticated areas or levels of phonology too. So manipulating, adding, and deleting sounds. When we're talking, so if you see, you need to know this because you might see phonological errors in your students' reading and spelling. When they go to sound out a word for reading or spelling, if they're leaving out sounds, adding sounds, if they are reversing or transposing sounds, that's showing you a phonological error, and that shows us that they're going to need some phonological support in order to get past that. We can also think about orthography. Orthography is that system of our written language. So at the very basic level, it's the fact that we use these letters in the alphabet to represent sounds. That's basic orthography, just the fact that we have these wackadoo symbols and we have arbitrarily connected them to sounds. But usually when we're talking about orthography, we're usually thinking beyond just the basic alphabetic principle, and we're talking about the fact that we use CK at the end of the word back instead of just K or just C. So that when we're thinking of like what looks right, that's usually we're cueing the orthographic processor. Now, we don't just expect kids to memorize what looks right or just absorb these patterns out of the blue. Well, actually, frankly, a lot of times we do. In balanced literacy and guided reading, we do kind of just expect them to absorb the patterns and make sense of it on their own. What we want to do with structured literacy is directly teach these patterns. Some of them have rules like CK or a pattern, CK at the end of a word, because it directly follows the short vowel. That's different than the word beak, like a beak of a bird, which uses a K, or the word rake, which uses a K because those have long vowels. Anyways, those kinds of things fall into orthography. Why do we use OA in some words versus OW? Well, there's a pattern for that. But is there a pattern for OA versus O consonant E? Not really. So we're going to have to build up their visual knowledge for those kinds where there isn't a pattern or rule that goes with it. Okay, phonology, orthography, now it's morphology. This one is all about the roots, prefixes, suffixes, and so of course it's connected to meaning. So at the very basic level, morphology is cat. You put an S on the end, it becomes cats. We know we're talking about more than one. That's our morphological processor would look at that word cats and it would see that S on the end, be able to kind of block that out, decode cat, pop the S on the end, all the while knowing what it means. When it comes to spelling, let's say you said the word jumped. Well, jumped ends in a T sound, the T, but our morphological processor is we pull that in to help us realize, well, oh, we're talking about jump in the past tense, so I'm not going to show that with a T. My brain knows that it's past tense, so I'm going to pull up the ED for the spelling of that. So all three of these processors are working in tandem to support children as they spell and read. Children might have strengths and weaknesses. They might be really strong with phonology, but their orthography and morphology are poor. Some of my students with dyslexia are strong with morphology. The meaning part of their brain is tip-top shape, that's great, but they are dyslexic, so phonology and orthography are their weak areas. It helps to know what kind of struggle your struggling reader or speller is having, because then we can tailor their instruction right to what they need. So this is, if you're a visual person, this is more of a visual map showing what's going on while kids are reading and spelling. So we have the phonological processor, the orthographic processor, and then the meaning processor is the morphology area. So this is not literally a map of where it is in your brain, but just trust that this is all on that left side of your brain, and it's in your Motes book as well, this description. So here we are. I think this is from the Shaywitz book, And it says in the title here what brains must do to read words, but we're also activating these areas when we go to spell words. So we have the phonological processor in green, the orthographic processor is in the back, the letter word recognition, and then the meaning areas, that would be where morphology is. So let's think about the word astronaut wearing all these different lenses. We're going to put on the morphological lens, a phonology lens, and an orthography lens. Because when you, as an adult teacher, as an expert with this, look at a word, I want the parts of that word to be so obvious to you that you don't have any questions about it. I mean, perhaps some advanced Greek and Latin roots, you don't have them all memorized, but you at least acknowledge that they are a root. Eventually, your children should have this kind of knowledge too. If they know the word astronaut and they recognize that not phoneme when they go to spell it, they're not going to spell it N-O-T, because they're going to know that not, when it's part of a big multisyllabic word, would be spelled N-A-U-T. So that's their morphological processor chiming in there. So astro is one chunk and not is another chunk. Now we're not doing syllables or phonemes there. That was just morphemes. So that had 2 morphemes in it. Astronaut, if we're going to break it into syllables, which is fine, we can do that too, has 3 syllables. Astronaut. Now, if you're doing it just at the syllable level, it's possible that students would at some point, if they're in 2nd, 3rd, maybe even 4th grade, not be spelling astronaut correctly because they're sounding it out, but they don't have that kind of advanced knowledge of the syllable not. Orthography would be looking at each phoneme and how it's represented. So we've got, well, pretty much it's just one sound per letter there, except for that AU vowel team. And if we're looking letter by letter, of course, you know that. And if we're thinking about phonemes, now there were 2 phonology ones. There's the breaking it into syllable chunks, that kind of phonology, and then there's the breaking it into actual individual phonemes. If I was going to hold a child accountable for spelling the word astronaut, I'm thinking that would be 4th, 5th, 6th grade, especially if we are in a school where we're doing a lot of advanced word study and we're getting into morphology and word trees and things like that. And I would be cueing their morphological system as opposed to just having them sound it out syllable by syllable. Okay, in the next few slides, I'm going to be doing an overview of the English language. This is content that you should have had in 633 Principles of Reading, but if you're still feeling like a little bit fuzzy on this stuff, I want to make sure you're very confident here for these for your case study that you're teaching and just going forward, because this is going to be background knowledge for you by the time that you get to the reading clinic if you're a reading specialist, and I don't want you to be having to learn this stuff then. So let's just do a review, and if you're feeling very, very secure on this already, just because of your prior training or your job and what you do every day, you can skip a few slides. So let's think about how our language is set up with consonant sounds. All sounds are made when a little puff of air comes out of our mouth, okay? Like a, b, k, d. One little puff of air is coming out. Now, if that little puff of air is blocked somehow by our lips, teeth, or tongue, that's a consonant sound. All of our consonant sounds, you're going to see our mouth, that little puff of air is blocked. Watch. B, m, v. So my teeth, my lips, my tongue, they're doing something. Except for the letter H. That's a weird one. Now, another way to think about consonants is our voiced or voiceless cognates. We call them quiet and noisy brothers. The LIPS program by Linda Mood Bell and the Lively Letters program handle this head on. So a lot of times if I notice that kind of error with my Orton Gillingham students, I will pull in my LIPS and Lively Letters materials to kind of target that little weakness of theirs. So if kids are having issues with B and P, that tells me that they're having an issue because B and P are articulated the same way. One is voiced and one is voiceless. That is in your Bursch book, and it's in your Motes book too on phonology. So if you need to dive deep in that, if that does not make sense to you, I want that to be easy peasy, because a lot of children's errors, phonological errors with spelling, are because of voiced and voiceless. I'll say I want them to spell the word bulb, and they'll spell it with a P at the end because of that BP. Or I want them to write the word back, and they'll spell it with a G at the end because of that G-K similarity. Also, we have consonants that are continuous, meaning they get dragged out. Sh, o, those are continuous sounds. And then we have stop sounds. G, t, d. Those are stop sounds. This is important to you because when your students are learning how to blend or segment words for spelling and reading, continuous sounds can be easier for them to blend with, and stop sounds can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to have you take a minute here and go down the voiced and the voiceless and see how they're articulated the same way. B, p, those are lip poppers. D, t, tongue tappers. G, k, choking sounds. Z, s, I forget what that one's called. Kind of a skinny air sound. V, f, lip coolers or lip biters. J, ch, v, zh, sh. And then also go down all of your stop sounds and all of your continuous sounds. Your stop sounds should all be clipped. There should be no schwa on the end of those. You shouldn't say b, you should say b. You shouldn't say k, you should say k. Pause if you need to and practice those on your own. So if the consonant sounds are sounds made when the puff of air is blocked by your lips, tongue, or teeth, vowel sounds are made when that puff of air is not blocked, which means it's wide open. So for this, so you can try opening your mouth in front of a mirror to test out the different shapes of your mouth. A lot of phonological errors with spelling and reading are connected to vowels. A, eh. There's just a very slight difference between the shape of our mouth when it makes those sounds. So that's subtle, and that can cause errors with reading and spelling. For another kid, it could be I, eh, because that's another similar one. So if you notice that pattern, it's not random. You'd want to know, oh, right, of course, that's a phonological error because they're articulated so similarly. So my intervention will target that. I will bring out a mirror. I will show them what's happening in their mouth. I will tell them that when we go to read or spell, we have to be really careful about noticing the shape of our mouth or looking at that symbol and making our mouth shape match. Now, all vowels are continuous sounds. They're dragged out long. So long or short, they're all going to be dragged out. In fact, to get children used to dragging out the vowels, the Foundations program has this page right here to help the children, like as they're dragging their finger along that line, say it's long. A, I, a. And as you've seen, I've referenced a lot of Foundations materials here. These are the closest we have to Orton Gillingham materials that you can buy commercially. So I use them to support my Orton Gillingham and my structured literacy work. So the keywords that Barbara Wilson has chosen for the Wilson and Foundation materials are superior. Not every program has such great keywords. A lot of stuff you'll find might be like igloo or elephant, but those keywords are a little tricky because they're not pronounced the same way regionally. Like egg, egg would be a hard one because egg, some regions pronounce that a little funny. So we want to use keywords that have a very clear vowel that can be isolated, because the point of the keyword is to cue the child about what the sound is. So if our kids know the letter name, but they don't know that random sound that goes with it, we have a little helper, and that's the keyword. So you say the letter name, then the keyword, then the sound. And if they get stuck, you think, let's think of the beginning of octopus. What do we hear? Octopus. We hear ah, that's a round sound. So our long vowels are often easier for kids to pronounce because it's just the name of the vowel. So that part's a little bit easier for kids. The hard part with long vowels we'll get into later is the spelling. That's orthography. So here we have the vowel circle. We will see this again when we talk about some Lindamood Bell materials, but the LIPS program from Lindamood Bell introduces this vowel circle, and you can find, this is just sort of a bootleg version of it from online. In Lindamood Bell, the students memorize this vowel circle and are able to write it out themselves. For our I don't usually do that with my students. I will just, if there's sounds that they're getting mixed up, I will talk to them about how they're articulated similarly, and we'll do some mirror work to notice the very subtle difference. So let's pretend this is a face sideways. So if you kind of turn your head and did a cross section of your face, that would be your nose. The lowest part is the chin, and then the ear is just showing you the back kind of your jaw there. The sliders and the crazy R's or the R control, they're off to the side. They're not part of the vowel circle. So I look at the top of the vowel circle, and anytime you see like E-E, A-E, that's basically the long sound of that vowel is what they're trying to represent. So watch my mouth as my mouth changes as I go through all these sounds. E, I, A, A, O, O, U, U. Okay? You can pause and you can try that as well. Our sliders over there are the vowels where our mouth slides from one position to another. So this can be tricky for spelling because sometimes our students segment that separately. So the word like pie that ends in IE, the children might go pie, and they might kind of force themselves into a Y sound there at the end. So the long U and long I are sliders. U, I, our mouth slides from one position to another. Same with oi and ow. Oi, ow. Now I kind of breezed over the short O and the AU, AW. I don't notice any difference between those sounds. I don't know if that's a regional thing or what. Most of the time in a vowel circle they have short O and then AU and AW. Those make the same sound, but they'll have that as like two separate things. It all sounds the same to me. And our R controlled vowels are not the same as the consonant R. The consonant R is pronounced R, like rat. So we can see our teeth and our lips are doing something there to block that little puff of air. R. That's different than the vowel sound. So when you hold up your consonant R, you shouldn't be saying R, rat, No, is a vowel sound. Look at my mouth is not blocked. Or, R, those are the other R controlled vowel sounds, not blocked either. So now we're getting into orthography. Whew, this is where things get hard. In second grade, you start to shift and we start to expect our students to represent some of their vowel teams correctly in some basic words, not all of the spellings though. It helps to not teach all the spellings of long I at once or all the spellings of long E at once. It helps to kind of motor through them systematically rather than teach them 6 ways to spell things. A lot of times in those big core programs like Journeys or Reading Street or Wonders, it'll have a word list with EE, EI, EA, it's like all these E, and they don't actually teach the kids why some words get this spelling or others get this. They don't necessarily teach which spelling choices are the most frequent and the most likely, which ones go with 2-syllable words or 1-syllable words. All that is very valuable information for kids as they learn to spell. But if we just throw all the words at them and expect them to memorize it, only those with very strong visual memories will make it through. So we have to be thoughtful about how we approach this. Usually in Orton Gillingham or in structured literacy, I would teach 1 or maybe 2 vowel teams at a time. What you see listed here in the variety spellings, I believe I have it listed in order of frequency. So something that is fun to do is to have a mnemonic device, like a little sentence that helps students remember them. So like I think I had one for E, although it looks different than this order I have here. He needs meat and candy for his niece and monkey in Cleveland. And a mnemonic device like that, and then if we put all the long E spellings in red, that helps us remember the order of them. I don't launch with that, but once we get a few long E spellings under our belt, we add on to that sentence to help keep track of them. So digraphs are something that we handle for reading, but they also, of course, come up with spelling. Not as hard necessarily for something like TH or SH, but WH pretty much sounds like W, so that's a tricky one. And CK, children have to learn that that comes at the end, and then and it only gets used when it comes directly after a short vowel, like in the word back or tick or knock or something like that. And what else? Oh, and CH has the same sort of a thing, but with TCH. So TCH would come directly after a short vowel, like in the word hutch, whereas CH would get used at the end of the word if there's a consonant in between, like bench, or if it's a long vowel, like beach. So reading with digraphs is one thing, but learning to spell with them is another thing. Some digraphs have more than one sound, like CH, the most common sound is ch, but they can also make the k sounds in words with Greek origin, like school and Christmas. And then it can make the sh sound in words with French origin, like chef. So sometimes most of the time we're going to teach school as a sight word because we're not teaching this rare spelling, of the CH making the k sound. We're not going to teach that to our kindergartners and first graders who are going to see the word school all over the place. So instead, we teach that as a sight word for the time being, and then it can be addressed again later when we're doing our upper level stuff. So blends, when we're thinking about spelling, blends are related to phonology because there's no trick here. They are what they are. It's just the basic alphabetic principle. You hear the sound, you represent it with the letter. The problem is for very young children who are still developing their phonological processor, or for children with dyslexia or dysgraphia, they might not be as sensitive to hearing those blends and being able to represent them in spelling. So, for example, in the word, if the word is black, the student might sound it out, b-ack, and they just might skip right over that L. I've seen that. Or they might go black, and they'll sound it out, but they won't represent it in spelling. The more advanced student, an advanced kindergartner or somebody who's on grade level in first grade would be able to manage fully segmenting words with blends. Now, words with initial blends are typically easier to hear than words with final blends. And I don't mean literally hear, physically. I just mean process in your phonological processor. Those final blends, they tend to get kind of lost at the end of the word when we're spelling. So you might see more issues spelling with final blends at the end of words than at the beginning of words. But for initial blends, a lot of initial blends have R and L in them, and those are called liquid sounds. And as you might know, children who have a little bit of a speech delay or some articulation issues have trouble articulating the R and the L sound anyways. So those are tricky spots for words. Even though they're at the beginning of the word, the part of the word that's usually easier to hear and process, they tend to just be slippery spots in words. The ending blends that have an M or an N in them, so like in the word camp or the word band, it's a vowel and then that nasal sound, that M and N, that is definitely a tricky part. The word camp is often spelled C-A-P because it gets kind of messy and muddy in the middle there and they don't clearly hear that. So when you notice those kinds of errors, it's not just random, oh, they made a mistake. You can zoom in on, aha, that's the kind of error that their little brain makes. So I'm going to give them targeted activities. I'm going to, first of all, directly tell them that that error is happening and show them how they can be more sensitive to it. But then you also plan those targeted activities to zoom right in on it. I handled this a little bit on the other slide in terms of helping you know how to correctly pronounce the R-controlled vowels, especially that sound, in contrast with the consonant R, which makes R. So this is an orthography issue because we need to have our students be really good at spotting the vowel R and knowing that that's a unit. I find these aren't too, I mean, these are definitely a slippery area in terms of articulation and speech, and a lot of our lower elementary kids still have issues with the sound in terms of, you know, just producing it in speech. But that does, just because a child has issues articulating it doesn't always mean that it's hard to read or spell. A lot of my students do better with R-controlled vowels than with vowel teams. The orthography around these is strange because it's a vowel with an R, but at least it's like a limited pattern. That's it. It's a vowel plus R, done. The vowel teams show up in so many complicated ways that I find more spelling and orthographic issues there. Now, of course, when you go to spell a word with the sound, E-R-I-R-U-R, how do you know which one it is? There's no rule for it. There are some general patterns, like ER tends to come at the end of a two-syllable word, farmer, teacher, farther, because it can be like a noun, like to teach, and then the noun of that is teacher. Or it can be a comparison word, faster, stronger, higher. So you're going to have a lot of ER at the end of two-syllable words. It's going to be a suffix a lot of the time. Doesn't always have to be, like the word her, of course. IR tends to be like not always, but it can be a circular word like skirt, swirl, twirl, whirl, things like that. But not always, of course, because of bird and, you know. And then UR is mostly one-syllable words. So that's I think that's the most common for one-syllable words over the IR choice. Burn, curb, turn, things like that. So then, though, to make things complicated, AR, yes. Then to make things complicated, AR and OR can also say the sound, usually at the end of an unaccented syllable, like dollar, beggar. They both have the sound, but it's spelled AR. Doctor, professor, those also have the sound, but spelled OR, and those ones, the OR usually goes with a person or a profession. So you can see that this would be layered. We wouldn't teach it all at once. When we're teaching R-controlled for a first grader, we'd have different expectations for spelling and reading as opposed to a third, fourth, or fifth grader. I've said it in another presentation, but the syllable type should be this big umbrella you have for really organizing your teaching for children, depending on where you are in that continuum or scope and sequence. You should know which syllable types they can read and spell. And sometimes they can read syllable types before they can spell them. So closed syllable words, that's mostly at the phonological level. If children are having trouble reading and spelling there, those are likely phonological issues because that's still one-to-one correspondence land. Yes, we've got digraphs in there too, and a little bit of orthography. Obviously, just even using print and letters at all is considered orthography, but mostly when we think of closed syllables, that's the phonological land. So our pre-K, our kindergarten readers, our struggling first graders are in the phonological zone as they learn to read and spell accurately with just basic one-to-one correspondence. When we get into vowel, consonant, syllable, that's getting into orthography because we're having them notice that pattern, that silent E there, that pattern, and they have to represent, or they have to change their vowel pronunciation for reading, but for spelling, you have to remember to put it on, because when you sound out the word cake, you hear three sounds, k, a, k, but they have to know, they have to have that orthographic pattern in their brain that when they hear the long vowel, they pop that silent E on the end. Open syllable is fairly easy when we're doing one-syllable words because it's mostly just she, he, hi, go. Those end up being sight words for a lot of kids anyways, so learning that syllable type isn't that novel. So on your Orton-Gillingham scope and sequence, I think open syllables is deep up in level 3 because when you're doing open syllables as a part of a multisyllabic word, now you're going to get into a lot of issues with schwa. So spelling open syllables is often tricky. Vowel team and R control syllables, that's major orthography land, especially because our vowel teams have so many options. Sometimes there are patterns to support us, like OA in the middle of a word, OW at the end, but then there's other times when there's not a pattern. EE and EA, there's not a reliable pattern there. So we have to build up their visual memory and visual knowledge. Our controlled syllable, we covered that. That's a lot of orthography as well, but it's a little bit more finite than the world of vowel team syllables. And a consonant LE syllable sometimes is easy for children to learn to read, you know, like puzzle and table. Those could be words that first graders learn to read, but spelling them is hard because you have to know whether or not you're doubling that consonant in the middle. So why would a child know to spell puzzle with 2 Z's or bubble with 2 B's? They have to be really strong with thinking of that first syllable. Is it open or closed? How am I going to represent the rest of it? So that's actually fairly complicated when it comes to spelling. Syllable division is often something we teach as a decoding strategy because when they look at the word, they can find the spot to break it up based on these patterns that we teach them and then read the word. For spelling, it might not be as clear because we've got that schwa sound that's always going to show up. So if you want to work on spelling multisyllabic words, I try to use the ones that, first I try to use words that don't have a schwa sound in them so that I don't confuse kids immediately. So even in the word basket, you can hear the second syllable in basket. It's unaccented, and so the vowel isn't pronounced as clearly, so we get kind of that short I sound. Schwa usually comes out as short U, or short I, eh. So in basket, the child would likely spell the second syllable K-I-T, and they would have no other way of knowing that unless we overpronounced it, basket. Same with insect. Well, that one's not as bad. I guess I could hear that. So when it comes to spelling, and you get to vowel teams or you get to just multisyllabic words in general, you're going to see that their spelling naturally lags behind with their reading because they might be able to read words like that and their brain can kind of autocorrect when they read the word basket. It knows to snap it together as basket, but not necessarily for spelling. They can't always do the inverse. So one way to handle this is to overpronounce words for a while. So you could say, spell the word basket, tap it out, basket, and you could just do the job of overpronouncing it for them to help them make sense of it. But besides that, you would teach this in systematic chunks. So you can get in the Orton-Gillingham Word Finder book, or there are lists online of words arranged by syllable type and where the accent is, so you can teach them in groups. So words like Alaska, annoy, avenge, they all start with the letter A in the beginning. So if you teach that schwa pattern all at once, you know, you teach one schwa pattern at a time, the kids have an opportunity to kind of anchor that family of words together in the same storage place in their brain. There are 5 major spelling rules as well, and I find these a little bit more satisfying to teach because they're pretty dependable, and dependable things feel good. Much more fun than working with vowel teams and the schwa sound. So these are already spaced out on your Orton-Gillingham Structured Literacy Scope and Sequence, and if you are in a good curriculum, these would be spaced out through the first couple years of school as well. Usually the floss rule is taught in first grade. The doubling rule, I believe, is taught in 3rd grade in foundations, the dropping rule and the changing rule. So this gets into morphology because for the words, for the rules 3, 4, and 5, those all involve adding a suffix, whether you're adding a vowel suffix or a consonant suffix to the word. So in that case, there has to be knowledge of suffixes and changing meanings. That has to be there, of course. So I'm not going to go through all these rules because this is an overview, but they are explained in depth in your Birch book, and your Birch book even has a script for how to teach these words. So remember, your Birch book is that book that you had in the course 633 Principles of Reading. Keep it. I hope you still have it because it's an amazing reference for when you're doing your structured literacy practice in this class and your Orton Gillingham training. If you search for the spelling rules online, if you search for spelling rules, you're going to get all sorts of wackadoo stuff like, you know, I before E except after C. But if you search for the actual name of the spelling rule, you'll probably find some activities that you're looking for. So avoid searching for spelling rule resources in general, but rather use the specific rule or write the 5 spelling rules. Sometimes that will bring you here instead. So still in the land of orthography, this is where things get tricky. And this, if you had a second, third, fourth, and upgrade student and you tested them on the primary or elementary spelling inventory, you probably saw a big breakdown here when it comes to spelling options for vowels and digraphs and trigraphs. Typical students of those ages, second, third, and fourth, are making sense of where to put which representations, which graphemes to use for the different sounds. Some of them have a pattern and there's a certain option that makes sense based on position, like OY in the middle, OY at the end. Other ones don't, like A consonant E versus AI. They can both come in the middle of words. And then to complicate things, we've got homophones, meaning that made and made are both acceptable, AI and A consonant E. So even in a particular grade level, students are going to be experiencing some difficulty with that, but that starts to get ironed out as they go through elementary school. And if you have a fourth grader who doesn't know that AI exists or even where to put AI, that's alarming. It's one thing if your first grader can read it but not spell with it, but as you go up in the grades, there are certain vowel teams and consonant digraphs and trigraphs that have more of a pattern, and those ones students should start to learn first. The ones that don't have a pattern, and it's just you have to memorize it, like why the word float uses OA versus O consonant E, you could imagine a second or third grader maybe still making that error. So this is really orthography at its root, our very complicated spelling system. And we have so many graphemes, we have so many ways of representing sounds, and so knowing which grapheme goes with which word is hard work. So these little pictures you see on the screen, those are all screenshots from Emily Gibbons, the Literacy Nest. She has blog posts on these kinds of spelling patterns. So if this is something that is brand new to you and you have no idea what I'm talking about, I recommend looking at her website. It breaks it down very easily. Of course, this is also in the Birch book from 633 and in your Motes book for this class, but her blog posts are very readable and they might be a nice supplement to the textbooks. Now this content is also in your Birch book and in your Motes book. I'm just going to review it briefly. Okay, when we talk about morphology, we know that a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. So that could be a prefix, a suffix, a base word, or a root. So prefixes and suffixes you probably know, beginning and end of word, not too complicated. The trickier thing I think is when you're talking about base words versus roots. So a base word is its own word, like the word camp. Camp is a base word. You can add ing and make it camping. You can add ed and make it camped, things like that. A root is like a base of letters, and prefixes and suffixes can be added onto those. So there's free morphemes that can stand alone or bound morphemes. So think of something like struct. Struct is part of the word construct, instruct, construction, instructor. So we don't ever use the word struct or the root struct on its own, okay? So that has to be connected to other parts. And okay, so and then something else we need to know for spelling purposes is that our especially our suffixes. They can be a vowel suffix or a consonant suffix. So vowel suffixes start with a vowel, ed, ing, y. That's important because when you're adding a vowel suffix to the end of a base word, this gets into spelling rule territory, those 5 spelling rules. So if you have students who are making spelling issues, like they don't know that in the word skipping, you double the P before adding the vowel suffix, that is a little bit of orthography and a little bit of morphology there, all mixed together. They might know that you're putting the ing on, so good, check, they got the morphology part, but they might not know to double that P, so that's more orthography. Whereas when you're spelling the word skipped, you're going to double the P, that would be the orthography piece, and then adding an ED is the morphology piece. So if they spelled skipped, S-K-I-P-T, they didn't double the P, oops, orthographic error, and they didn't put ED for past tense, oops, morphological error. So noticing what kinds of errors your students are making helps you determine what kinds of spelling instruction they need. Online, you can find lists of prefixes, suffixes, and roots very easily. There is included on your scope and sequence for structured literacy for Orton Gillingham a suggested list of, the order of introduction. That matches the syllable type. So they teach things like sub and non and dis and level 1 because those are closed syllables, so they are decodable. But the thing with prefixes and suffixes and roots, well, not so much roots, prefixes and suffixes, is it doesn't really matter if it's decodable. We're teaching it as like a memorized unit. So you're not going to have the student sound tap really, because you want them to have it memorized. So I'm just pulling out, I make for my packs of cards, like phonogram cards, I make separate suffix cards that we add on to the end of our nonsense words as well. And these are just easy ones. These ones I happen to be using, they're all vowel suffixes because I was using them for the 1-1-1 rule and that spelling rule. But you could do it with all these complex ones too, like auto and deci and things like that. Now, my favorite resource that complements Orton Gillingham is this book right here, PS, Prefixes, Suffixes, and Roots. This is totally utilitarian. So in the beginning, there's a table of contents, and it just has different prefixes, suffixes, and okay, so I'm on the X page. It has a word list. Well, first of all, at the top of the page, it has the origin. Well, this isn't the first page of it. Sorry, that's like page 2. On the first page, it has the origin and the pronunciation and the definition. It has a word list and it has sentences, and then it has passages that it's just almost comical how many words they include with that particular prefix in it. So if the prefix is X, this one's a poem, has so many words with it. So if you are doing upper level work with morphology students, I recommend getting this book. You will find it's so practical. It's not a textbook, it's just word lists and passages, super friendly for teaching. The tricky thing about suffixes is that these could change not only the meaning of a word, of course, but the spelling of a word. And I talked a little bit about that with the spelling rules. Something I didn't mention on the previous slide is we have something called chameleon prefixes, which is where the prefix is slightly different. Con, I think things like that. And there could be a couple different versions like ill, that they mean the same thing, but depending on the root or the base word that they're connected to, the prefix has to change its pronunciation a bit to have a nice flow. The visuals on these past couple slides are from All About Spelling. All About Spelling and All About Reading you can find online. Those are Orton Gillingham based programs. They're meant for homeschooling parents. So because they're meant for homeschooling parents, they have a really big blog life and free activity download area because they're supporting their customers. So I'm not a homeschooler, but I find their information is really polished because it's a nice package program. But some of their freebies on here would really support your work as a structured literacy teacher. Anyways, so we can see there we have some roots, and the Latin roots are nice because they tend to be really decodable. So look at those. Those are all, well, except for form, that's a bossy R syllable. Oh, and port, but they're mostly closed syllables, so they're easy for decoding. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck decoding wise if you teach a few prefixes, shun, things like that, and you could get pretty far. And those particular ones they have on those lists have a really, I don't know, tangible meaning. Port means to carry, spect means look. So even if your student might not be able to spell these words, perhaps they would be able to read them and understand them. And for some of our students, the spelling is going to lag behind the reading, and that can be okay. We don't want to hold back their reading too much. We still have to meet their spelling where it is as well, but morphology is a nice way to push them forward, even if their spelling can't quite match. We can still do it for reading and understanding. I believe this word tree printable is from All About Spelling or All About Reading. So you could probably find that free online as well. But here's just a list of port meaning to carry. And look at, if we teach that root and we teach that handful of prefixes and suffixes, look at all the words the student would be able to decode. That feels really good when a child can see, you taught port and then you're showing them all these pieces of the words. That is pretty satisfying. So that was a pretty heavy overview. It wasn't so much of an overview. We did go kind of deep into some of the things of phonology, orthography, and morphology. That is your content knowledge. You have to understand the English language at a deep level if you're teaching a struggling student. We're not just reading over books over and over with them, hoping that more time in books magically solves all the problems. No, structured instruction will solve the problems. Just throwing books at them is not going to magically do it. So your content knowledge, let's assume that is really strong by now. That has you prepared to teach your students, but also understand your students, because you need to understand the kinds of errors they're making to create that very strategic and targeted instruction they need. So when you can read their errors as a reader and a speller, that just gives you more ammo for better lesson planning. Now, students who are making mostly orthographic issues, so they've got good phonological work, but it's really at the spelling level. Their spelling is severely behind their reading. That's looking more like a dysgraphic profile. So you might also notice their handwriting is abysmal and they have trouble or a lot of anxiety with sentence level writing and paragraph writing. Even though they're in the upper grades, it pains them to write the simplest response. Dyslexia would be that middle part of the pyramid. You're going to see orthographic and phonological issues. And I can tell you, there are some of my dyslexic students that describes them to a T. They're so strong with morphology, and they have really strong like content knowledge and vocabulary, and they understand how prefixes and suffixes change the meaning of words, and they can even read things like shun, but then they can't spell or read vowel teams properly. And there you have it. They've got the orthographic and the phonological root to their problems. And lastly is children that struggle with all these areas. If it's at a severe degree, that could be oral and written language learning disability, which we're not covering too much in this class. Now, that's not to say that just because a child struggles with all three of those things that they definitely have that kind of learning disability. Some of our students struggle because they're learning English as a second or third language. Some of our students struggle because they're a curriculum casualty. They didn't go to kindergarten, or they have a lot of risk factors in their profile that mean that learning to read is going to be challenging for them, even though there's not a neurological difference with them. So some of our students are curriculum casualty, some are ESL, and then some have a neurological disability. Regardless, us knowing the English language, us being able to understand their errors will help us prepare to meet their needs. I'd like to cover very specific techniques. I'd like to cover that in person when we meet live over Zoom, but we'll do a teeny bit of that now. But I think that will be more helpful for me to talk about live with you. You don't need me to say this again. Before you do any instruction, you got to know your content, you got to know your student, and you have to know their learning profile, which category they may belong to. So by now you've already dabbled with using that structured literacy template or that Orton Gillingham template. Yet you might not feel too confident with what's expected at each step. So don't worry, we're going to cover that when we meet in person on Zoom. Step one that you do in every lesson is the phonogram blending drill. Now, obviously that works on reading because you have the flashcards lined up and the student is tapping and reading those flashcards. Yet, that's also supporting spelling because when you work on anything phonological, when you're doing any kind of tapping out, that is building phonological skills, of course. And when you have each grapheme represented on a card or a chip or a block or whatever, like the way they are with the phonogram cards, that's working on orthography, especially when it comes to things like vowel teams and digraphs and Bossy R. Those cards, they're color-coded yellow or pink, and they're supporting the structure of the English language because they're putting those units on a single card. So right there in the phonogram blending drill, you're already working on spelling support, even if you don't know it. Phonemic awareness, anything you do to work on phonemic awareness will support their phonological skills, right? That's what it is. So if you're doing segmenting sounds, blending of sounds, manipulating like adding and deleting or substituting, all of that is phonological. That's the underlying skill that they need to spell. Now, that's not the only thing they need to learn to spell, not just phonology. They also need orthography. But all that phonemic awareness work you're doing, any kind of Alconen book drill you're doing, if you bought the Kirkpatrick book or the Haggerty book, that's all supporting your student as a speller. Now, when they're reading a review word list or a review game, you can sprinkle in questions during these reading opportunities that cue them towards spelling. Not every single word needs to be questioned, but sprinkle them in because you want their little analytical part of their brain turned on here. So if they read the word back, you could say something like, how come back uses a CK instead of just a K? Something like that. Now, you can only ask them the question if you've covered it in your instruction, of course. Or why in this word are we using a C for the first letter instead of a K? Or how come this word has an AI in the middle instead of an AY? So you can sprinkle in those kinds of spelling questions here and there during their reading work to keep to fine-tune the orthography. If you're doing Wilson magnets or reading rods, just like your phonogram cards, those work on phonology and orthography as well, because anytime you have, oh, where is it? Why is this so hard for me? Here we go. So in that word, rope right there, it's phonological because the student had to segment and spell or read, to get each of those little letters, but then there's also that orthographic representation because we see the magnets, what the magnets have on them. It's just like the phonogram cards. Ditto for the reading rods. So phonogram cards, Wilson magnets, reading rods, all different ways to do the same exact thing. They're little tactile pieces that you can use to maneuver. It's going to cue phonology because it's one piece per sound, and it's going to cue orthography because we see the grapheme or grapheme combinations that represent that sound. How you use them, you need to talk students through them, have them echo you, have them tap, have them explain. That adds a little bit more value to the activity. For things like spelling rules, it helps to have that outlined in a checklist. So that's something that we'll cover in depth in the reading clinic, but something like the 1-1-1 spelling rule where you double the letter in skipping, that it would help to have that broken down in a checklist to help students make sense of those rules. I don't have that written in front of me right now. Then most importantly, and this is something we're going to talk about live on Zoom, are the 3 Orton Gillingham spelling drills: the sound drill, the word drill, the sentence dictation. If you are a Foundations classroom teacher or already Wilson trained, this is probably ingrained in you already, and this might be part of your daily work. Anyone doing structured literacy, whether you're ESL and you're not even going to do Orton Gillingham through Gordon, anybody doing structured literacy work should be aware of these 3 spelling drills and how they help a speller. It's just like the phonogram cards. It's just daily practice for reading. This is the daily practice for spelling. Now, you don't want it to be just this miserable quiz at the end of your lessons, so we can talk about how to make it a little bit more dynamic and helpful. But it is a good progress monitoring tool because if you do it every lesson, you've got data right there, every lesson. In step 1, we might use our phonogram cards and bend that activity towards spelling. I'm going to send you a whole presentation on how to use the phonogram card drill in step 1 and bend it towards spelling. So I'll won't say anything else here. If you notice a persistent error pattern with a student's phonological skills, like they're confusing short O and short U, or you notice they're mixing up the k and g at the end of words, if you want them to spell bag, they're putting a CK or a K instead of a G. If you're seeing certain error patterns, then that's a hint to you, excuse me, that's a hint to you that you need to design sort of like, not a whole lesson necessarily about it, but you might need to design a little bit of a cleanup. So sometimes up near step 1 on my, like the phonogram card drill, I might also do a phonemic awareness activity. Could be with Elkonin boards, or it could be a sort between 2 bowls or 2 cups, and I draw the student's attention to it. We usually look in the mirror, talk about our lips or mouth. We might do some tactile work with fingers or chips. I'm modeling and I'm helping them zoom in on this error pattern that they have. And then I'm just sprinkling in a drill, and I might keep that little drill or practice opportunity in the lesson for a couple lessons, you know what I mean? So if short O and short U is hard, I might not be able to clean it up in one activity. So maybe for the next few lessons, I'll just sprinkle that in. It doesn't mean the whole lesson, my whole new topic is about short O versus short U. It just means that I noticed that was an issue and I'm going to give it special attention and try to clean it up over the next few lessons. When you see specific error patterns, do something about it. Make a note on your lesson plan and try to clean it up in the next few lessons. Of course, 2 of my other favorite tools, the reading rods and the Wilson magnets, they could be built in daily just for daily practice with your new concept, or you could use them as a tool to clean up some pesky error pattern that's been happening. So with my sorts and with my Elkonin board and chips, I usually use that for something like a phonological error, you know what I mean? So something like, okay, they're mixing up 2 sounds or something like that. But my reading rods and Wilson magnets, I think those are better at helping me clean up orthographic errors. So if they're having trouble remembering when to use that silent E or spelling with vowel teams, things like that, your Wilson magnets and your reading rods that have the print on them and they're color coded, that will help you target and make sense of those patterns. Now, if you're talking about issues with like A consonant E versus AI, where there's no rule or pattern to help distinguish that, then I think a word sort would help you target that, or a passage that's doused with A consonant E and AI words, because then your child can pluck them out and you can graph them and you can put them into piles. You can draw a picture that uses all the AI words, a sailboat, a pail at the beach. Why can't I think of any other AI words? A pain from the sunburn, things like that. And you could anchor it sort of with a mnemonic. But if you're looking for more pattern-based orthography practice, then your tools with print on them will help you. In your Motes book, and certainly those might be the old Motes pages actually from the 2nd edition, but in your Motes book and certainly in your Bursch book, it's already outlined for you a checklist and a chart of the different components that go with these spelling rules. So rather than put the rule in a long narrative, okay, the floss rule is when you hear the sound at the end of a 1-syllable word, if it directly follows the short vowel, blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of language. And most of the people we work with have trouble taking in and managing all that language. So a checklist with bullet points or little check boxes might help them make sense of it. Is it a 1-syllable word? Does it end with the sound s, l, f, z? Does that sound come right after the short vowel? If yes to all three, then double the final letter. You know what I mean? Like just simplifying it into a checklist with barely any words might help a student more so than just all this oral language we're throwing at them or a long written paragraph with the rule explained.
All right, let's take a look at some case studies to see what we can notice from these the student writing samples, because that would be step one. Before you're planning an intervention, you have to understand your student and who they are. Okay, these are all from the Motes book, by the way, so later in this course you'll be reading about these and you'll have a chance to look at them in depth again. So for this little boy, this is November of first grade, and the day that he did this lesson, it says in the Motes book what they had learned the CH sound. So you can see he's responding to some story about Chuck or something like that. So I'm seeing him doing lots of sight words. My, is, about, likes, he. Those would be sight words that he would have learned. That looks great for a first grader. I'm also seeing birthday. It's possible that that was a word written on the board if it had to do with the story. Maybe that was on a word wall or something, or a birthday poster in the room, but if not, wow, that's great. We see the word coming, and in this word he did not drop the E to add the ing, but for first grade, that's fine. He spelled the sight word come and he knew that it had ing on the back. I'm really pleased with that. The orthography of that sight word that he had to memorize, and also the morphology, the ing piece. Turned, oh, today I learned, yeah, coming up, but today I learned. He used the UR to represent the sound in learned, and in first grade, I think that's great, no problem at all. First of all, EAR is a much more advanced Boss-ER spelling, so I wouldn't expect that from a first grader. Learn is usually eventually just learned as a sight word because of that funny spelling there. But look at that, and learned ends in the D sound of ED, and he still knew to represent that with ED. That is really great morphological knowledge. About, look at that sight word. Chuck, that's really great phonology and orthography there. Ch, k. He represented all those sounds, and he even picked the right digraphs and vowel to do so. And the word I learned about Chuck, he likes ch sounds. I don't know if that word was on the board or not. I'm assuming it wouldn't be, but look at that. That's really great. This child has strong phonology, orthography, morphology. This is looking good. This is a child in the same classroom on the same day. This child wrote, Chuck likes to eat some chili and some chocolate. Great sentence there, really good ideas. He did get the CH in there for the word Chuck, but then never again was he able to put the ch sound in there. So we see that he uses the J for chili and chocolate, and I can see why, because they're cognates, ch, j. They're articulated the same way, except one is a noisy sound and one is a quiet sound. So I can see that kind of makes sense, that error pattern. Not so much in first grade. We don't really want to be seeing that happen in first grade, but I suppose it's acceptable. But not really, because it was a day where they learned all about CH, so that should have been at the front of his brain, and so on. Now for the word likes, not only is likes a sight word that's taught in kindergarten or first grade, but, well, I guess he wouldn't have known vowel consonant yet. So he's sounding it out very phonetically. Likes. So great that he's got that phonological knowledge, but his orthography is not quite there yet. It would be surprising. It's okay that he doesn't know how to spell it maybe, but I would be preferred to see a K there instead of that X. Likes to eat. He spelled eat, E-N, so that is an issue there. I don't know if he got kind of jumbled up phonologically when he was sounding out the word eat and lost track of himself with those consonant sounds. Some, wow, he wrote some both times. We can't quite tell if that's an A or a strange O, but it looks like that's a sight word he has memorized, so good for him. And is a sight word he has memorized, good for him. Now chili, illy. He's using the E right there when that has the short I sound. So that's a phonological error. We don't want to see that, even in first grade. Chalk, that's one scoop. Let, that's another scoop. So he sounded those out. So besides the phonological error of the CH and the J, I guess that's pretty good for a first grader for spelling. He did manage to keep track of most of the sounds in that word. I'm not terribly alarmed by what this kid wrote, but I do see some phonological issues. All right, this child is a first grader as well. I don't know if it was in the same class as the other two entries that we just saw. He wrote, I went to the birthday. Me and Cassidy made our bedroom into a haunted home, or haunted house maybe. I showed my Gram and Gramp. Okay, so this is some sort of a Halloween picture. I'm seeing lots of really good stuff. I'm seeing capitals and periods. I see letter formation. He's doing a really good job with the sizing of his lowercase, knowing which ones are tall and which ones are the small ones. So really great motor skills and kind of spatial awareness there. Writing in complete sentences, also really great. Let's take a look at the spelling. So Gram and Gramp, as you know, have that nasal sound, right, comes right after the vowel. So in the word Gramp, he missed the M in between the A and P, and in the word Gram, he showed it with an E instead of an A. Those are phonological errors. I'm not shocked by them in the beginning of first grade. We'd want to clean those up, but that makes sense. That's the kind of error that makes sense. Looking at the word haunted, hot-id. So again, in the word haunted, well, I can imagine why he put the O for that aw sound for the AU spelling there. That's an orthographic error, but we don't expect a first grader to have that kind of orthographic knowledge yet to know that vowel team, so that's totally fine. He missed the N before the T, so he, instead of spelling haunt, H-O-N-T, see how he spelled it H-O-T? So that's the third time we see an error around those nasal sounds. And then haunted. Yes, that's a morphological issue, but he might not know that the base word haunt then gets the past tense, suffix ed, haunted, or descriptor, ed. So I'm not so worried that he missed that ed spelling. Our, he looks like he spelled A-R-E, which frankly is confusing for many kids. That's not such a problem. His friend or sister Cassidy, he wrote Cass-D. I'm not too alarmed by this. This looks like pretty good first grade writing. I'm definitely seeing evidence that he needs some those nasal sounds cleared up, so I'd want to cover that in a group with him. But based on everything else I see, I'm not too alarmed. Okay, Janet's going to give us something to talk about here. Don't worry, if you thought those other samples were too good to be true, we've got some work cut out for us. So this is a second grader now. Now I don't know what time in the year, but even if this is September of second grade, this is very alarming. If you look down that list, that's some, sight words, go, and, him, and then other words that we would expect her to be able to sound out and spell correctly. Pretty much all of those we would expect a second grader to sound out. Now, yes, some of them have vowel teams, but the O, vowel team, that's very common. There's all those low-level sight words, book, cook, why can't I think of anything else? And then the EA and reach, that's a really common high frequent vowel team. So again, that would, even if she was guessing, that would be one of her choices, would probably be EE or EA. What do we see her do? We see her do the double O in the word go. And I'm seeing a nasal and final stop sound issue. The word will, this is very concerning. We can see this with our pre-K or kindergarten kids, that if they're sounding out w, that W sound, their mouth starts to go w, and that prompts them to think of the letter Y. Not in second grade, though, we shouldn't be seeing that. And then that short I and short E can be confusing. So far we've seen orthographic issues with the OO to represent the O sound. We've seen phonological issues like at the end of and for the short vowel. The fact that she didn't double the L in will, that's an orthographic thing because that's like a, does it look right? That's the floss rule there. Him. She got two of the sounds, and then either she mixed up and put the vowel at the end while she was, you know, thinking of those sounds, and she selected the short E again instead of short I, or did she just randomly pop a silent E at the end? Was she guessing there? The word cook, if a kindergartner or pre-K student wrote that, great. Maybe even first grade for a while, great. But soon enough, children in second grade, they have been exposed to so many sight words, look, book, etc. That's surprising. Also, children learn orthography that C does not come at the end of one syllable words like this. So that is a very unusual representation. For the word light, we see a vowel error, and then we're seeing, yeah, she didn't even get the right vowel sound represented. It's not like she just didn't pick the right vowel team. She just didn't even get the right vowel sound. Dress, true. The DR blend is hard to articulate and sometimes represent, but not in second grade. That's a very alarming phonological error. No vowel showed up. The word reach, she probably had some idea that it was one of those funny little digraph things, but only represented the H, so that's an orthographic error. And then again for the EE, or not choosing the long vowel there, that's an orthographic error. Enter. This is kind of morphological because it's like or you could say phonological, because when we hear the syllable N or the syllable X, we know that we're doing not the letter N. Or when we're doing X, we know we're going X, not the letter X. So that just shows a little bit of immaturity with her, I guess the phonological meeting the morphological there at the syllable level. So we're seeing, I mean, this either screams curriculum casualty or likely dyslexia because we don't have any other data on her, but these are the kinds of spelling errors that are very alarming, riddled with phonological problems. Okay, so we have another second grader here, and he has written some sentences that were dictated. So let's take a look. The egg, that would be a phonological issue. Hatching. Oop, that's an orthographic issue with the TCH. Not so alarming in second grade, but the issue with egg, yeah, that's pretty surprising. This animal is a cow. Interesting. Animal. I'm seeing some phonological issues as he breaks down those syllables. I'm not seeing those syllables represented in an appropriate way. Now, of course, the word animal has some schwa sounds in there that make it tricky. Animal, yeah, there's the I in the middle and then the O at the end, but we're not even seeing an attempt that matches the sounds. So that's the phonological thing that worries us. The girl is looking, probably. So orthographic issue there with look, not representing the or the k sound appropriately. And this happens a lot with R controlled vowels. Kids are mixing up the order there, the orthography there. Oh, the girl is looking for her belt in the closet. So we see belt, we have a vowel issue there. Her is only represented with the R. So that is orthography for the word her, phonology for the word belt, closet. Well, hello, that looks great. That's kind of surprising. The boy and the girl throwing the ball. So throwing, we're seeing an orthographic issue, only showed the O. Boy, he has OU. Probably those diphthongs can be tricky, so that would say ow. Or maybe that's a really messy Y, and maybe that is supposed to be a Y. Kind of interesting for this second grader because we're seeing, I'm wondering if he's got a lot sort of memorized that he's depending on, and then the words that he does sound out, he doesn't have, he's got some weaknesses with phonology and orthography that are showing through for the words he doesn't have memorized. They shoot. I don't remember what that one is. They showed it. I don't know what that one is. The boy can't run because his leg was broken. So there we have our issue with boy. Now the spacing is getting a little bit crazy too. Can't doesn't have a apostrophe. Can't run because is a sight word. He did get a lot of letters in there. That's a long one. Because his leg, that's an alarming phonological error. That's the second time we saw him do an A, like an egg and leg. Both times used an A for the E. And then broken, broke, it looks like he wrote. So we're seeing some more orthographic issues with the letters he chooses to represent the sounds. This would alarm me. I bet he holds his own in school. I bet he looks like a strong student, but really when you take a closer look, the kinds of errors that he is making are not really expected for a second grader. Even though he can do things great, like, you know, randomly he's got closet spelled here. I wouldn't hang on to the fact that he spelled closet right and be like, well, look, if he can do closet, then he just needs to work harder on the others. I would instead look at all the other errors he's making and wonder why he can't more consistently spell better. Okay, this one also will give us lots to think about. In fact, when you are in the reading clinic, this is one of your quiz questions. It's going to be to analyze this, like make a list of the kinds of categories of errors you find, and then explain it, or explain your intervention plan. Okay, so this looks like items, it says at the top, I think she's describing her, like her house or something like that, or her dream house or something. And she has sort of a title, I guess, items. 2-bay garage, 5 bathrooms, 6 rooms, indoor pool with a slide that you can go real fast on, dining room that has a cabinet that connects to the kitchen. The kitchen has a dishwasher that has, it's in Apple Tree Point, no basement, U-turn in front of my house. Okay, so that's her dream house. So this one, to get to the chase, we're going to see phonological, orthographic, and morphological, I think, errors here. Let's take a look. 2, we've got our sight word there. That might have been a D, that 2-day garage instead of 2-bay garage. Look at how she spelled garage. Now, certainly that's a challenging word, but garage, we would expect something different phonetically. She heard that sh at the end for the garage and didn't know how to represent that sound, which I'll give her that. That's hard. We're seeing lots of BD issues, a couple of random apostrophes throughout. Indoor pool. So pool has a doubled L, so she's trying with the floss rule there. With, which technically is a sight word, even though it's also CBC, represented with the wrong vowel. You can hear her spelling out slide as she wrote that. Slide. So when kids put that schwa sound onto an end of a consonant, sa instead of s, you'll see it show up in their spelling, just like it did there with the first L. And then she represented the I. She did that with an A. So we're seeing lots of phonological things here. That you can go real fast. Fast is spelled F-A-T-E. So that's definitely a phonological issue, just kind of throwing random E's on the end of things. Dining room, we see her using the wrong vowel again. Looks like A is kind of her go-to vowel that she's popping into some of these words. Dining room, that, except here, she needed an I, and we have an E, has, okay, connects. So when she's spelling words that she really needs to sound out that she doesn't have memorized, like these multisyllabic words, we're seeing big issues. So this is phonological, just like the word slide. When she went to sound out, that wasn't even 2 syllables, it was just longer. Connects. So she just got a couple of the sounds, but lost track of the order of them there. Phonological issues. Kitchen, sort of stayed in better order there. Kitchen. It's almost like she did the kitchen and then knew there was another syllable, so then put a digraph in, the wrong digraph for the CH. That's an orthographic issue. But then she did get the ending there. IN is an acceptable spelling because it's the schwa sound in that syllable. So that would be fine. Dishwasher, we're seeing the BD, we're seeing the A come up again. Whoa, hello, look at washer. That looks great. Apple tree point. Even though she's in 3rd grade, she doesn't have the orthography of that vowel tame OI. We're seeing tree kind of out of order there. It's an R blend, but she's kind of showing it like a bossy R. Basement, we're seeing a phonological issue with the PB sounds, how those are similar. Basement, we're missing the N in there. That's an phonological issue, that nasal sound. U-turn in front, we have fort, phonological issues there. Of my house, ouse, so she doesn't have the right orthography for the ow sound. Yeah, phonology and orthography, this is looking to me, if not curriculum casualty, this is dyslexia dysgraphia. This is what it looks like. Her handwriting is pretty neat though, some sizing issues with letters, but we'll take it. Okay, and let's look at Miss Britt here. This looks like a letter, so dear. Now it is in 3rd grade, so I'd expect dear, you know, they've learned letter writing. That would be something that we would expect from kids. And that vowel team EA is not too complicated. Dear Emily. Something I didn't talk about on the last slide with that girl who was writing about her dream house. And again here is not a lot of sentence structure in either of these. So periods, capitals, spacing, or general organization of sentences was lacking. So let's take a look at this here. Dear Emily. So this, you know, we need a comma. We need to go down to the next line, but okay. Want to go to the Alpine sled with me on Sunday. So we're missing a question mark there. In 3rd grade, we would expect someone to divide up their work into sentences. So want, Alpine, and sled or slide. Either way, we're seeing orthographic issues if she doesn't have the vowel consonant E for Alpine and slide, or maybe a phonological issue if that's supposed to say sled. If you can come, call me on Saturday near lunchtime, and then we can make the plans over the telephone, and it will be a sleepover. So bring your sleeping bag and warm clothes. This is really cute because we are going to camp out. Okay, super cute, but let's take a look. Came, we're seeing a lot of silent E's missing throughout as well. So that would be an orthographic issue because she hears the phonology, she hears the vowel, but then doesn't have the right pattern to go with it. For call, we're seeing that she's spelling phonetically still. We would expect her to have the orthographic knowledge in 3rd grade of ALL. Near, we would expect her to know EA, just like dear, near. She's not having that EA representation. Lunch, so there's a vowel issue there that's phonological, and then she has the G instead of the CH there, which is interesting because G and K, like G and K, are cognates, but CH isn't a cognate there. I mean, G is not a cognate with CH. For make, we're seeing again, she doesn't do the silent E. We can make the plans. She's missing that final N, that nasal sound. Over. Over would be a sight word at this point. You could sound it out. Over. We're not seeing that. Telephone, she is sounding it out. So technically tele, that's a morphological error because tele is like a root, T-E-L-E, but maybe a 3rd grader doesn't know that yet, so that's fine. But phone, again, doesn't have that silent E, not to mention the F. We're missing another vowel team here, so that's orthography. Bring your, I'm not sure what happened there. Sleeping bag. So she really has no ways to represent long vowels. We're not seeing vowel teams. We're not seeing vowel consonant E's. Warm clothes. We got to give it to her. The AR, when it comes after a W, does make a funny sound. It says the OR sound. So maybe she was thinking OR, but based on the rest of her errors, I don't think she has R controlled down either. Close. She does have, okay, now she brings out the vowel team, the OW for the O sounding close. And in her defense, close is a trick word. We don't really hear the TH in the word close, so that's okay. Because is a trick word, yet our third graders should be knowing that by now. And R is a sight word, which she just got all jumbled up. So again, we're seeing lots of phonological issues here. Minimal orthography knowledge, you know, besides just the bare bones of representing the letters for the sounds, but nothing about long vowel sounds. So again, this is complicated. Okay, this slideshow is done, and what the big takeaways that I wanted you to have here were to understand those three realms: orthography, phonology, and morphology. I want you to understand that really well so that you can feel strong about understanding the content that you're expected to teach, and then you can make sense of the error patterns that you see, and then of course you can design effective interventions. Because if you know what Britt needs, this little third grader right here, if you know that she's still making phonological errors, then your intervention plan needs to have some phonological therapy. Kilpatrick drills, Hegarty drills, talking about, you know, those voiced and voiceless cognates. She's also going to need some heavy orthography. She's stuck. We can see the ceiling. She's stuck in short vowel land. She can only represent her vowel sounds with one letter. She's got to get into slowly and carefully long vowels and how those represent. And we're not starting at vowel teams. We're starting at vowel consonant E with her. So when you see Britt, you're not just thinking, oh, I'm going to pop her in the extra help group that goes for all third graders. You need to think of the third grade group, if you're doing this in your school, the third grade group that's going to have phonological support and going to be way down doing first grade content like vowel consonant E. If you want Britt to make progress, you have to meet her where she is and design something targeted that will work on her skills. Easier to do when you're in a bubble and you're doing private tutoring. Harder to do when you're in the context of public schools and you have a huge caseload and scheduling issues, etc.